Tasting Climate Change wishes to thank all of the sponsors supporting the conference. This specific seminar is made possible by the moderator for this seminar is Michel Bouffard. Michel is the founder of Tasting Climate Change, an author, a wine educator, and a journalist. She recently co-wrote a book called Quel vin pour demain, which was published last September by Duno. The book explores solutions for the wine industry to adapt and mitigate climate change.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the last seminar of the 2021 Tasting Climate Change Conference. We've been talking a lot about how to adapt and how to mitigate climate change in the wine industry, but I do believe that all of this would not be making sense if we were not talking about consumers. How can we engage consumers better? The good news is we know that the consumers are interested. I remember in 2019 in Montreal, we had about 500,000 people walking with Greta Thunberg in the street, wanting to talk to the government how they could act better to mitigate climate change. There's also a lot of research that has been done all over the world asking consumers if they were willing to pay more for the bottle of wine if they knew the wine were sustainable. And if you look at different research, one of them I think about is the Wine Intelligence in 2019. They show that across the board, whether you were millennials or baby boomers, that people were willing to pay up to $3 more if they knew the wine was made sustainably. The challenge is the wine industry is complex, and sometimes the wine consumer just don't know how to reach for the proper bottle of wine. So today, to discuss how we can engage consumers better, I have an amazing panel, 4 people from the States, from Portugal, and from France. So joining the conversation with me today, I have Jérémy Courquier-Man, Master of Wine. Jérémy Courquier-Man has been a wine merchant in Paris for over 15 years, working with wine producers from all over the world and developing a privileged relationship with many prestigious wine growers. After passing his WSET diploma in 2012, Jérémy became Master of Wine in 2017 and won the Madame Bollinger Prize for the best performance in tasting at the exam of the Masters of Wine Institute. Today, Jérémy also trains French sommeliers who are candidates for international sommelier competitions. He is also a consultant and advises, amongst others, a Japanese airline company in its wine selection. At the same time, he leads conferences on international vineyards and climate change, the subject of his research paper for the Master of Wine exam. Since July 2018, Jérémy has been director of Kedge Wine School, the Wine and Spirit department of Kedge Business School. Each year, the school trains more than 300 international students in wine professions and brings together many researchers specializing in the wine industry. And I would add many researchers and specialists in climate change. Jérémy writes for various French and international publications. He is the author of the book Vigneron Essentiel, which won many prizes, including Clos Vougeot Books and Wine and the OIV Prize. And I also had the privilege to co-write Quel vin pour demain, who was published this year by Duno. Also with us today, Joshua Greene, editor and publishing of Wine and Spirit magazine since 1986. Joshua Greene began working in wine shops during college, later spending a summer as wine captain for Wheatley, a small inn in Lenox, Massachusetts. After graduating from Princeton University in 1981, Mr. Greene pursued a career in magazines, starting in management of special interest publications. His involvement with Wine and Spirit began as a consulting business and eventually led to his purchase of the magazine in 1989. Wine and Spirit today is a special interest publication with a circulation of 82,000 published 7 times a year, a major source of wine reviews. And the magazine also reports on travel, food, fine spirits, and the art and science of wine growing. Wine and Spirit has offices in New York and Los Angeles. The magazine has won 5 James Beard Awards for wine journalism. At Wine and Spirits, in addition of his duty as editor and publisher, Mr. Greene serves as the critic for Napa Valley, Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, Loire, Portugal, Australia, and New Zealand, providing tasting notes and ratings for wines recommended by Wine and Spirits tasting panels. Joshua Greene also contributes feature stories and commentary in each issue of the magazine. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Joshua. Josh actually was one of the first supporter of this conference. He's been a supporter since 2017. Wine and Spirit is a major contributor, and everyone who has registered to this conference is receiving a year subscription to the digital magazine. So Joshua, thank you so much for being on board since day one. Also with us from Portugal, William Wouters. William Wouters is a chef. He's the former head sommelier. I'm reading French-Anglais. I'm going to start over again. William Wouters is a chef. He is the former head chef for Belgium national soccer team, a champion sommelier. He has won the title of Best Sommelier of Belgium on multiple occasions. A restaurateur, and since 2007, he co-owns a winery in Portugal with his wife and winemaker, Philippe Papato, a producer well known to us from Portugal. In 2020, Wouters won the presidency of the Association de la Sommellerie Internationale, ASI, a 62-member country association charged with supporting and promoting the sommelier profession. In the vineyard and the winery, Wouters and Pato are nurturers of the land, practicing biodynamic viticulture, working with grapes indigenous to their home in Berada. As president of ASI, Wouters takes a similar nurturing and diplomatic approach, working with more than 50 board and committee members to create a team that reflects the diversity of its member nation. And last but not least, I have HONORE Comfort. In her role as Vice President of International Marketing, HONORE draws her 20+ years of international winemaking, international wine marketing, association wine management, and brand strategy experience to promote export sales of California wines while building the brand for California wine on a global scale. Previously, HONORE served as the Executive Director of the Sonoma County Vintners, an association of more than 200 wineries leading strategic marketing and brand development initiative around the world. Prior to that role, Ms. Comfort has responsibility for marketing several international wine brands to the North American market, including Penfolds and Rosemont Estates with Foster Wine Estates America, now known as Treasury Wine Estates. In 2015, HONORE joined Brack Mountain Wine Company, a mid-sized winery startup in Sonoma County, where she served as president and oversaw sales and marketing, brand development, and business strategy. In addition, she served as executive in residence at the Wine Business Institute at Sonoma State University. Today, HONORE lives in Ellsberg with her husband, where they manage their micro vineyard in the heart of Dry Creek Valley. Welcome, everyone. And before further ado, I would like to start with Jérémy. Jérémy, he is the director of Kedge School. So you wear many hats, Jérémy, but today we'll be talking about more your role at Kedge. Since you started to be the director at the school, you've actually implanted many changes, and you have this focus to make sure that the students who come from all over the world are well aware of how they can take part in adapting and mitigating climate change.
Indeed. Thanks, Michelle. And hello, everyone. Good evening if you're in Europe, or good morning if you're in California or Canada. So maybe I'll provide a bit of context. As you previously mentioned, I joined Kedge almost 4 years ago as the head of the wine department called Kedge Wine School. At that time, the department was delivering 2 wine education programs, and now we have 6. And whilst sustainability and climate change were covered in certain courses, we were discussing sustainability issues in wine marketing or wine economics, etc. It was not, and should I probably say, not at all the main focus. No courses or programs were dedicated to the topic. Might be logical because while climate is changing fast, sorry, we have been first a bit slow to react. Otherwise, we would, I guess, not be exchanging today about it. Anyway, as I wrote and researched about climate change before joining CAGE, I think you mentioned my research paper on climate change and its impact on Syrah in Hermitage. It was pretty obvious for me that we would need to reinforce the content dedicated to the climatic challenges. So the first thing I did, which is usually what you do, is I did a small benchmark, and I was amazed to convince first that it was already done in many other business schools and other wine management programs, and I was really super surprised when I realized that it did not exist. So it was about time to do it. So first, in all the programs we had, I decided to add some courses about climate change and sustainability and to call some experts from all around the world. And then I thought it's really time to do a full program covering the questions. So when you do these kind of things, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. The first is pretty obvious, but is why is it important? And I think it's because education is one of the most effective tools when you want to change things. And one of the main challenges is to change mindset and behaviors. And it's extremely important when it comes to the next generation. You need to put the new generation around the table. And this is what we've tried to do. Then you need to ask yourself, how can you do something effective, which can really contribute to change things? So first, might sound obvious, but bringing experts from all around the world, including you, Michel, by the way, trying to give the students a global vision of the issues, the challenges, but also, and that's very important, the potential solutions. Trying to make them contribute, or at least to shape them to be ready to contribute, to act, to adapt or mitigate. Because it's not all about knowledge. The most important when it comes to education is skills, especially when you specialize the students when it's their last year and they will be professionals right after the program. Then the other question is, what does it mean in terms of content and courses? So we started with the basics. Usually we try to give them a first global picture. So there's we use a 3 hours collaborative workshop called the Climate Fresque, which allows you to understand the essential issues of climate change in order to take action. Then we do a focus on the wine industry, the threats, but also the potential solutions. We bring them in experimental vineyards. Obviously, it was more difficult with COVID, but we were supposed to bring them in experimental vineyards with Hervé Queneau, our third co-author of Quel vin pour demain, so that they can see how things are measured with sensors, meters, etc., and they can understand precision viticulture. We have built partnerships with some of the organizations highly involved in sustainable transition. Vigneron Bio Nouvelle-Aquitaine, for instance, so translating organic vigneron from New Aquitaine. But we don't have just partnerships with them. They do participate in the course contents, and they try to teach the student and to make them understand what's the difference between organic, biodynamic, natural, conventional, etc., and what it involves, and what are the impacts of the different viticultural approach. Obviously, we organize field visits in inspiring wine companies because that's probably the best way to understand. They can face the people, they can discuss, they can ask, they can understand, they can taste the changes as well, because I think it's sometimes even more obvious when you taste different wines and understand what how it impacts the wine and its organoleptic balance. During some of the courses, students learn to calculate the carbon footprint of wine companies, and when we try to make them analyze, we also try to make them understand how to lower the carbon footprint, because that's something that will probably be very useful afterwards. Students are also working on what we call green projects. So very concrete case studies on sustainable projects that can be potentially implemented afterwards. And if we think the project really works so well, we try to help them to form the project. And there's a jury scoring this green project, and that's part of the assessment. And we have been delighted to welcome our first cohort this year, and the recruitment is very good for next year. So it's a bachelor, a specialization bachelor called Wine and Sustainability. So that's for Cage and for wine education, literally speaking. But I was thinking that it was also important to say a few words on our book. I guess I know you're very humble, so you did this very small video before, but you didn't speak about the content. So I'm going to do it because when I started with Cage, I asked myself, what can I do on a personal level to contribute even more and to try to help the wine industry to adapt and to rise to the challenge. I'm not a wine producer. I'm a wine educator, a wine consultant, but also a wine journalist and author, as you mentioned. I like researching and writing. I met you a few years ago, Michel, and I also met Hervé Quenol, who's one of the best climatologists specialized in viticulture. I had that idea somewhere in my mind that at some point it would be worth writing a book on climate change and wine. But you need to have the right idea, you need to have probably the right vision and to bring something on the table. And when I met both of you, I thought it's probably the right time. You want to be useful, you need to ask yourself a couple of questions once again. The first one is pretty obvious. Why another book on climate change? Actually, I've read a couple of books. I've seen there's a couple that have been written on the topic, some very good, but all were very focused on only a part of the issue, erosion, viticulture, winemaking, but none were trying to treat the topic more holistically, from vine to glass. So when I say from vine to glass, from the vineyard to the markets and to the final consumers, including shipping, packaging, marketing, etc. And I believe this is what we have done with 3 different perspectives, as we have 3 different backgrounds. We're all based in different parts of the world, even if Hervé is French, he's in New Zealand, and he's blocked in New Zealand for quite a while due to COVID. So this is what we've done. Many books and texts are mainly bringing stress and fear on the table, and that's also a very important point. I believe that this is a mistake. Emergency calls for collective action. If you tell the people that it's a disaster, then there's no hope and they won't move a finger. There's so many things to be done in the wine industry and so many things that are already implemented. And I believe this is, it was even a surprise for us because, I mean, we've been researching on different regions and different people from all around the world, and we were struck by the numbers of solutions that are already implemented. And this is also what we see when we listen to your panels, Michel, during your conferences. The wine industry can be an example, but it can be an example provided people believe it's possible and we focus on the solutions. And 2, and probably the most important, we share the knowledge. Because some wine producers, shipping companies, sommelier, retailers, distributors, importers, educators, etc. already do a lot. There's a lot of very inspiring initiatives, but the world of wine is so fragmented that sometimes they don't even know what's happening in the same region. We need to learn to work differently, to act differently. It takes time, and we will gain time if we share the questions, the successes, the accomplishments, and this is what we have tried humbly to do in that book, to highlight the solutions and to sort of build a first bank of knowledge with all the conferences and all the exchanges. And it was, I believe, definitely the while and a great journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Jérémy. I want to add to this, and you know, when we focus on solutions and tie it to the consumer, but it's exactly why I started this conference in 2017, is that when you read the paper and you look at what's happening, is people always focus on what's going wrong, the hail, the fires. And I was listening the other day on the radio, there was a psychologist speaking about climate change and why are consumers or people not more engaged, even when they were walking on the street with Greta Thunberg. Why do they forget the next day, you know, and not take public transportation, or, you know? And one of the things they were saying is it's because exactly we focus on what's wrong and not solutions, and we're not engaging with them. How can they be part of the solution? And I think this is really important for us in the wine industry to know that with consumers, is they need to see that what they're doing is making a difference. Because the way our brain works, if the result is for another generation and we don't see the result, we won't make a change. And that's something that's been discussed with a lot of psychologists. And so I think, to your point, whether it's from the education point of view and with our book, is really, we need to address the challenges, but we really need to focus on the solutions and how to help people to know about them so that they can take them. Before we move on to the next speaker, I have a question for you, Jérémy. You were speaking about what you've done at Kedge. Are you starting to collaborate with other schools? What you've done, you were saying that you found that other schools were doing some type of program. Personally, I don't know that many schools who do that. Are you starting to collaborate with other schools to see how it could become a bigger collective movement?
Yeah, of course. Well, we are partners with different schools, and they deliver a part of the content of our programs. It includes University of Bordeaux Institute of Vines and Wine, for instance, but also Bordeaux Sciences Agro. And for instance, we're thinking about having a course on agroforestry from next year. So yeah, and I think it's, I mean, you need to improve. Education is an everyday improvement. So and climate change is also implementing new solutions, and we're learning to face climate change every day. So obviously it needs to be implemented with new content and other schools, and we're not a technical school. I have a technical background, but not all the teachers have. We have more specialists in wine economics or wine marketing or supply chain, for instance. So we need to collaborate with other schools, and they bring that content, and I mean, we will probably build other programs with other schools. We collaborating with École Hôtelière de Lausanne, for instance. We have a wine hospitality program, and we have a course focusing on climate change and sustainability as well in that program. So yeah, obviously we try to bring as many people around the table as possible. If I may add a very small anecdote, I don't know if I still have the time.
Yes.
But I remember when it was the day of the lockdown in France, the first lockdown. And at that time, we didn't write our book, but my first book was published for, I think, 3 or 4 months. And my first book was about 26 producers from all around the world, some doing a lot to face climate change. And one of them is Ibn Sadi. We talk about Ibn Sadi in our second book. He's based in Scotland. He's a very famous producer, and I think it's pretty amazing what they're doing there. To try to find solutions in a very marginal, very extreme climates where it's super dry. They have this very dry wind called the Cape Doctor, etc. And so obviously when the book was published, I sent the book signed to all the producers. And Ibn is really living in the middle of nowhere. So it's something like 4 months for the book to arrive at Sadi Family Wines, and so that was the day of the lockdown, and I had this email from Ibn saying, "Well, thank you so much. The book looks great, etc." And obviously, I was like everyone, super concerned about COVID, so I replied and said, "Well, thank you. It's great if the book arrived." And I said, "Well, we're entering a very difficult period with the lockdown, etc." And Ibn answered, and that was something that was really shocking. He said, because he's always have the right words, I think. And he said, COVID will pass. The climate change challenge is our challenge, and this is what we need to focus on from now on. And I mean, he was right. And we've got the political and the government speaking about COVID and so many things all the time. And I mean, yes, it's important, but compared to climate change, it's nothing. And I still don't understand why we don't have in every speech something about climate change and about the environmental transition. And if we had that and the focus on the solutions, and if they helped us going for making a change, it would definitely help going faster against climate change. Thank you.
Merci, Jérémy. And I will come back in the panel discussion, but I do want to add to this. What's really encouraging is I've had the privilege to teach at your school a couple of times now, and I am just amazed at how engaged the students are, how interested they are. And even after the course is finished, they contact me and say, I've gone to do this, or do you know this, or do you want to, they really, it goes beyond the course. It's a journey, and I see from them connecting with me afterwards that this journey doesn't end at that school. And so, you know, for all of you listening to us, if you're working in a school, you know, we have a big role to play, and it's a really important role. So thanks for sharing that, and we'll come back at the panel discussion. I would like to invite Joshua Greene now to speak to us. I remember writing when I first started to do my conference in 2017, and I emailed Joshua asking, you know, would you like to support my conference? You know, your magazine is really well known. I'm not well known, and it would help if, you know, people like you believe in the cause. And I think it took a day before I got back an email saying, we'll be there. And you've been a supporter, but you also been there. I know that you've been listening to the conferences this year, and you came to Montreal in 2019. You were one of the first in a magazine to talk about climate change. You and I had a discussion. You were writing about this in the 90s, about climate change in your region. Today, with climate change, an editor and a publisher is faced with a lot of dilemmas. I would love to hear how you're dealing with the dilemmas of digital versus printing, and also when you're reaching out to journalists, and you know, who do you ask to write for you? Do they have to be from that region? How do you work that out?
Sure. Well, I do want to talk about those things, absolutely. And first, I want to just thank you for putting this conference together, because I think it's really helping to keep climate change top of mind for a lot of people in the wine industry. And it's taken people decades, you know, probably 5 decades to really come to terms with the fact that climate change we are agents of climate change as humans. And
Josh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you turn on your volume a little bit? We're having trouble to hear you.
Sure, turn on my volume.
We could hear you properly earlier. So it's just very low. Your voice can.
I haven't changed anything. Is that better? Is that any better or no?
Not really. Maybe I know we have a technical team. Sorry, everyone. I think it's worth taking a second to fix that, because we want to hear what you have to say. I don't know if my technical team listening behind, if they can try to see if they can raise the volume.
Unplug my mic back in. Is that any better? Not really. Okay.
So the technical team will try to raise your volume a little bit. So just maybe try to speak louder, as if you were in theater.
I turned my phone off, but I didn't turn my mic off. Okay. I will speak loudly as I can. Anyway, a lot of people have now come to admit that there is a human factor in climate change. But what a lot of people are still wanting to take responsibility is they're the agents of great wine. So one of the things that we do as journalists is we're trying to figure out, really to answer the question that you were just speaking about, Jeremy was speaking about, how do you convince people about climate change actually happening, what impact it's having, and get them to take action. So a lot of what I want to talk about today is as a journalist, how we can do that and how we at our magazine have been trying to do that. A lot of times growers will tell a journalist, it's the land, I'm only the caretaker of the land, but there's an inherent responsibility in taking good care of the land that makes great wine. And there's also this strange contradiction. If you are making great wine in a particular place and the climate changes, is that still the same land that will make great wine in the future? So that's where I think a journalist comes in, helping to identify what might be the shifts in terroir for great wine, how we define it, what's our role in the more political aspect of climate responsibility. And, you know, for us at the magazine, these are both emotional and kind of existential questions. We have to be proactive when we're reporting, but a lot of reporting on climate change is reactive. It's news reporting, by definition, reactive. Even as journalists will sometimes try to break away from that and try to give some perspective to place it in context, it's still these horrible things happening around us that create news. And as journalists, we feel like, wow, we have to pay attention to that today. So we're trying to figure out, how do we put it in a broader time frame? How can you as a reader, how can you as a wine consumer use this information in today, tomorrow, the years to come? It's just this constant barrage. And there's devastating news about wildfires in old growth forests, at the borderlands where people are living, at the edges of vineyards, incinerating homes like they did in Sonoma County, and they have in other parts of the world, in Portugal, in South Africa, and incinerating wineries. And then there's like this all, you know, everyday kind of quotidian stuff about news of people releasing new wines, even if their winery got blown away. So when we get to reporting on climate change impacts, there are not a lot of wine journalists who are in a 24/7 news cycle. Most are either doing maybe a blog once a day at most. Most wine writers are on newspapers or weekly columnists. And then there are magazine writers like us who are monthly or sort of longer lead times. And we really need to use those longer lead times to provide context and perspective. So it's a longer view of the impact of the news, a longer view of the impact of climate change, both in the past and into the future. One thing we do a lot of is tasting reports and trying to tie our descriptions of how a wine tastes back to the farming. And this gets back to something Jeremy was saying, you know, talking about where wines grow, how the vines are tended, if a vineyard has earned certification for organic or biodynamic viticulture. We often try to include that in our tasting note. And we really believe that we can not only taste that kind of commitment, but that is crucial to the aspect of making great wine for those growers. So a lot of restaurants now are putting little icons next to the wines on their lists, marking people that are doing organic work or biodynamic work. But there are a lot of growers who are doing great work, who have been doing great work for decades and as for generations, never switched away from organic farming. They're not in any way certified, and they're not really recognized either. There's regenerative agriculture. It's another way that growers are working to sustain their vines and the land in the face of climate change. And it's really a question of, you know, how do we taste their work? It's hard to say. What we do know is that when we taste a year's worth of wines, which is about 10,000 wines during the year, the wines that generally come to the top, the producers who generally come to the top, are the ones who are really sensitive to the health of the land, that they're practicing sensitive farming. And I think that it's a concept that we need to develop, sensitive farming concepts, because we talk about sustainability, which is somewhat different from that. when you asked me to think about tasting climate change and that phrase, I think about Côte de Champenois, and I think about a story I did just before the pandemic, going over to France and researching this particular category of wine that to me is changing. I happened to taste a 2008 wine from Eliorier, their Ambonnet Rouge in New York, and it sort of blew me away. It was one of several Côte de Champenois wines that I tasted, and I decided I needed to go there. And you asked, well, do you need to go there? I thought, yes, I do need to go there because I needed to get this story. And I don't go to any place to get a story. I go to places where there really are stories to be found. So it's like, it's a choice I need to make. Am I going to increase my carbon footprint by flying to Europe? I was facing down Francis Ely outside his cellars and introduced to him. We shook hands and he said, immediately the first thing he said to me, I hope you are not here to write a story about how with global warming, there will be more Côte de Champenois. So he sort of blew me away on the first statement. And that was definitely the reason I was there, because we'd seen a lot more ripeness in champagne grapes. It was no longer a constant challenge to get ripeness in champagne grapes. And this really impacted the way that we were seeing Côte de Champenois wines coming into the US market. But I didn't say any of that. I just described to him tasting his wine in New York. And that impression of the wine, it wasn't news, it was an observation of what he was accomplishing. And after I told him that, he relented and we got a more amiable rapport going. I had acknowledged his agency in making that wine. And I think that was a really important thing to acknowledge both to him and to readers. He said to me, people in Champagne think you can only make great wine, you can only make red wine in easy vintage. And we turned that idea around and said, we're going to work these parcels and do what it takes to make great Ambonnet Rouge every year. So for 25 years, the vines have made Ambonnet Rouge, not because they're great years, but because of the tirage and the selection we do. So he very cleanly avoided any reference to climate change during those 25 years. But he didn't achieve his goal because he made me question how much of what I was tasting was driven by climate change and how much by the work that he was doing, what his family was doing, what his team was doing. It's a really complicated question, and there's no precise answer. So both clearly have an influence. So in those 25 years or longer, the magazine and media landscape has completely changed as much as the climate has been changing. And we've been doing a lot of research into the carbon footprint of wine for producers. We also look into the carbon footprint for our magazine. The question you asked me a moment ago, Michelle, was, is there a reason to go to digital over print magazines? And there have been studies done 10 years ago and more recently, where there isn't, if you run a magazine with a view towards sustainability, it's not significantly different in its carbon intensive use as a business than websites are, because there's so much electricity that's needed to generate and to disseminate information on websites. But that assumes efficiencies that are not necessarily available to small producers, to small publishers who are a small publisher. So paper, for instance, is really so far out of our control. And that's the main carbon impact that a magazine can have, the way that trees are harvested, and the way that the forest is maintained. So we're now trying to keep that front of mind as we try to work to make our print edition more sustainable. We're making changes in that, and we're also shifting aggressively toward a digital first model. We don't want to give up print completely, but we want our business to run digital first. There was this definite, while I was doing research for this story, actually, for this presentation, I came across Magazine Canada's Carbon Footprint Compendium that they published in 2016. And they had what I thought was a really useful and valuable definition of sustainability from the International Institute of Sustainable Development. It said that sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So we're trying to find that sustainable place. We set out to define the core values of our business what we can contribute, how we can refine those values and our contributions to lessen the negative impacts and enhance the positive impact. Core value, journalists ask questions. We've been doing it forever, and we should be asking questions of ourselves. We've always been asking, how can we most efficiently and sustainably share communications with our audience? And that is a really urgent question now. We're often invited to visit regions, and for years, even before we were acknowledging the urgency of the climate crisis, we were always asking ourselves, is there a timely story to report from this region? Or should we be spending our attention focusing on a more urgent story from another region? Do I need to travel there? What you asked me before. Do I need to get a complete story by traveling there? Or can I get journalists on the ground who I can rely on? And we are always trying to gather journalists there that are going to be doing the same kind of work that we were doing if we went ourselves. More importantly, what kind of reporting is central to our core values? The answer to that is really that we believe that wine is about the place where it's grown. So it's crucial to report on how that place may be changing due to shifts in the climate. So if people like to read about people, they like to read about celebrities, they like to read about lifestyle reporting, this really isn't that. This is climate-driven reporting. It comes from a completely different place. It goes beyond the weather. It looks at how people in regions have been hit by subtle or maybe radical shifts in the weather. It looks at how vines are performing poorly or performing unusually well in the latest vintage. So we set out to focus our reporting on changes driven by the climate. What we have learned, it's complicated by matters of human agency. Can an individual grower actually do anything about it? And if the weather hasn't destroyed their crop, is it in their interest to discuss it? This is something we run up against all the time when we're trying to report on the climate. As for readers, the news can be so discouraging, people often just tune it out. So we've been really trying to work on a model that was not going to be blocking people from actually engaging with the news, engaging with the fact that climate change is changing, and how do you then act on it? So we did an experiment this year. We hired David Darlington, who's one of our top reporters. He's based in the Berkeley area and the Willits area, so we didn't have to travel to do the story. We wanted him to be reporting on the drought that was going on in Northern California. And it split in the end into two completely divergent stories. One was the people up in the northern part of the Russian River Valley, the northern part of the Russian River watershed, I should say, up in inland Mendocino, where they get fed by the Eel River. And their water was completely shut down, and they were losing their crop. They might lose their vines, and they were very vocal about it. The people in the Russian River Valley itself, where the water is fed by Lake Sonoma, and where they were not necessarily as strictly, severely curtailed, they were much less willing to talk with the journalists about what was going on with the drought. They were very reticent. They were concerned about whether their consumers would be put off by hearing all this news about the drought affecting their vines for that particular vintage. So it was really an interesting problem that we faced. And in the end, it really just ended up being a one-page story in the October issue about the drought in Northern California. We placed it just focusing on the facts, didn't lend very much perspective on it, and we ran along a story about the floods in Germany's Ahr, which just happened to be taking place at the same time. So we needed a new model for looking at a longer time scale and considering years or decades rather than just this immediate disaster of a drought or a flood. And that's beginning to take shape as we look at how we're going to assess the way growers are dealing with climate change and how effectively and valuably they are, who may be benefiting from the change as well as who's being hit by it. So in that same issue, we hired Jasper Morris to do a story on classified vineyards in Burgundy. And he looked at how they were handling the drought and the heat that was impacting Burgundy. These classifications were put into place. at a time when Burgundy was cool and wet in general, and now Burgundy is hot and dry in general. And so what he did was he sort of stated these challenges, and then he went on a tour of all these lesser regions in Burgundy that are suddenly benefiting from what was a handicap before. And it gives a reader an opportunity to actually look at a new condition that they may see, okay, this is a Grand Cru wine, but is this Grand Cru as grand as it once was, or is this village wine, or is this Ruby, or is it wine from a village that no one's ever heard of as good as it used to be? Is it better than it used to be? We had Stephanie Johnson travel to Rivera, a cru in Barolo, and she was taking a similar kind of a parallel kind of view for our December issue, where she looked at a cru that was overlooked in the past because it was too cool compared to a lot of the other crus of Barolo. And now that cool exposition is actually drawing a lot of growers to buy land there, and it's becoming one of the most revered crus in Barolo. So it's really these kinds of stories that provide actionable insights for a reader. They draw these insights directly from the climate crisis, and they also acknowledge the agency of the growers in how they're handling climate change in a positive way. We think that these kinds of stories are the future for wine publishing, for wine journalism, at least for long-form wine journalism. And we published a number of them this year. We're planning a lot more next year. And we think that it's sort of like a way for us to continue our goal of talking about discovery and setting out to talk about sustainability in the context of climate change. So I know that's a lot to digest, but thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Josh. I had a question, but I'll privilege the question that just came through from someone. So someone said, consumers often ask about how to find out about the wines that are farmed sustainably and make sustainable business decisions if they don't have organic or biodynamic certification. As journalists that know at firsthand about many of the world's producers, did the magazine ever consider creating a category for these producers for consumers to know? Because it's always so hard for consumers to find out. So are you having maybe a section or category that are just really putting forward those producers?
It's one of the things that we actually discussed in a meeting today. In fact, that this is there's an ongoing communication problem with the with greenwashing, and we don't want to acknowledge producers necessarily. Even there are producers who are certified biodynamic who use it for marketing purposes more than anything else. Mm-hmm. I don't think there are a lot of them, but there are some. And there are producers who would never get a certification who are making incredible wines because of the sensitivity of their farming. So we struggle with this a lot. And we do think that there should be a way to highlight these producers in a separate section of the magazine to talk about sensitive farming rather than necessarily each category of certification. And it is something that we do know from visiting people. We don't know, there's a lot that journalists don't see that producers share among themselves. And I think it's hubris for journalists to think that they know what's actually going on a day-to-day basis in a vineyard. But I think we do know to some degree from the quality of the wines, who's growing great wine and who's growing it sensitively. And we should be sharing that as best as we can.
And that was my question, is there a code of practice or a code of writing? You never really know what's going on fully, but do you have a code of practice saying, to the best of my knowledge, this producer is sustainable and therefore I will write about it and put it forward in the magazine?
Mm-hmm. I would say that of the many things I could say negative about social media, probably the most positive thing about social media could be people talking up producers who are farming in a sensitive way, and people talking down producers who are greenwashing. And I'm not on social media, so I don't necessarily see where that's happening. But I think that's probably one of the more valuable things that social media could be doing in light of farming and climate change.
Thank you, Josh. We're going to come back to you. There's a lot more to be discussed, but thank you so much. I would like to invite William Wouters, who has kind of that, you're wearing two hats. You're the president of ASI, but you also work at one of the most highly regarded you owned one of the most highly regarded winery in Portugal. And with climate change, there's been a lot of talk about perhaps we should go back to indigenous grapes because they are the future in many regions. We have to explore more of those grapes. Portugal is certainly blessed with a lot of those grapes. The challenge sometimes is to get consumers excited about those grapes that nobody has heard of, especially if they're from regions lesser known. The sommelier has the work to do at the end, but you've done an amazing job at getting the sommelier behind your amazing wine. Just worth talking about the Instagram. Your wines always end up on Instagram. I have had a beautiful wine of Philippe Pato. It was delicious. So my question to you is, how did you manage to communicate the virtue of Berada, first of all, who's not that well known, and the virtue of those indigenous grapes to sommelier, and what can other producers learn from that?
Good evening, everybody. Here's evening already, or a good day for the other people in the rest of the world. I think it's rather obvious, being, with my background as sommelier, and I was always, looking for the itchy wines, when I was younger, and still doing it, always looking for the things on the edge, because I think average is only average. So I think you should look for the people who try to be above average in difficult situations. So by accident, I ended up in Berada because of love. I followed my heart and I ended up in Berada. So Berada has got a lot of things against it, right? Certainly in the past, I know Joshua knows Berada very well. He's been here many times. He knows all the difficulties we have here. And difficulties, which is Atlantic Ocean, it's an advantage, but also a difficulty. So we work biodynamic. This means you have a lot of pressure from the Atlantic. So you have to think differently. And how you think differently, you got to look around. This is something important for growers today. Look around, and then think sustainability is around you. You don't have to buy it, it's around you. Watch nature, listen to nature. You feel it and you hear it. It's amazing, really. The moment you start working like this, it becomes part of you, and it's not like a religion. I'm Catholic, but I'm not practicing. I'm very respectful to everybody, but there's something about this which works. It really works. We're doing now for 15 years almost, and now the last 3 years, we are the first in Berada to be Demeter, certified. Because I always told to Philippa, the sommeliers, that they want to tell stories, but if the story doesn't fit, it comes back in your face. It doesn't work. So if you go for the certification, just get it, and don't say you're doing it and don't have a certification, because this is just selling cooked air. And I don't think it's right towards consumers. You cannot do this. So if you work to certification, get it. So anyway, so we have it now. And I have to say also, it's like an audit in your own company. You have to imagine a German company, Demeter, coming to Portugal, setting standards. It's quite a cultural clash. Portugal is very Latin, and the Germans are Germans. You cannot change them. There's nothing in the middle. It's always black or white. They're very, very rigorous, which is good, in fact. So there's a confrontation with ourselves, and it helped. So now we're getting there, and I see around us, people see what we're doing, and now we have a lot of demand from young guys to say, come and help us, support us in what we're doing, because also with everything that's happening around the world now, the prices for herbicides and pesticides are going up. So I think if you think in sustainability, you look around you, you can find everything in your area to balance nature, and I think nature is open to this also, to work together with you if you work on it. And this is interesting stuff. So we have some growers who speak with us, and they say, yeah, the herbicides is very expensive. Yeah, but why you use herbicides? You know, you should not use it. It's useless. You can do without. It's better. In the past, people never used it. It only popped up in the 70s because in industrialization. So in Barada, but not only Barada, there's more regions in the world like this where time stood still. You have biodiversity. Look behind me, the picture. This is a typical Barada vineyard. You know, we don't have to plant trees in our vineyards like in Champagne they're doing nowadays to create biodiversity. We have it. It was a disadvantage before because you could not go there with machines or tractors. It's all by hand. But now a disadvantage turns into an advantage. And I can put a lot of examples. You know, if you have 2 hours, you can speak for 2 hours for all the disadvantages. You turn in advantages. And I think this, as a sommelier, helped to make the story around the world now. And I think now the last 5 years we have a lot of I say this visibility in the international press because of the work we're doing. And it's not only us; it's other growers also. Really, that there are things happening in Portugal finally. And thanks to young people who went abroad and coming back, and they understood what their ancestors did, and they respect this, and they do better. In fact, they learn from the past and they look into the future. And this is okay. It's a statement you can make, but it's like this. And the future is the sustainability. And then you don't have to irrigate your vineyards. It's not you don't need to, because if you use compost and you work in balance with the viticulture you do, you don't need it. You don't need irrigation. It is totally ridiculous. And there's I heard Jeremy speaking about Ibn Sadi, you know, with all the old vines in Shana and stuff, about irrigation in Swartland. It's a dream. There's no water, but he does it well. He protects his vines with straw and everything. It's pure genius, the guy. He also uses the canopy management totally different, which is very interesting. So this is people who are in difficult situations who do better. And we went there and we were inspired by the guy. And we start to applicate some things we learned from him. We learned from Bisler Wine in Burgundy doing better things. And there are a lot of people around the world. And if you speak with the better ones, you learn, you adapt it to your place. And this is happening now. I'm very happy here in Barada. Things are changing finally, which is good. And I can put some other regions in Portugal also. Trás-os-Montes is a very emerging region also in Portugal. The Douro Valley, they're looking for cooler climate. They go up in the valley to look for other places where they can moderate their work better. Alentejo is the same. They go to San Mamet, also the mountains. They look for cooler places. You know, it's a different world. You know, I'm not a scientist, but I see what things are happening around me, and with the experience I have from drinking wine for all my life. You know, I remember in the old days of Bordeaux and stuff, but Bordeaux is interesting. Of course, they make great wines, but it's not the same. It's totally different. You cannot compare Bordeaux with the work we are doing. I don't want to criticize Bordeaux, but it's a different world. This is another reality here. You know, if you see this, you can take the best tractor you want. You know, it doesn't work, and also the horses doesn't work. It's all handwork. Sheep can help you. That's the only thing, because they're small and they're very, I say, manageable, and they're very calm animals. Also, they don't disturb the natural habitat of the rest of the animals in your vineyard. It's very interesting.
William,
I got Philippe next to me, who's putting a bunch of things to say. Oh, no.
I just want to ask you, because, you know, you're saying we're privileged in Portugal. We have a lot of indigenous grapes, and I can see that from the work we are doing, we're inspiring other people to do the same. I'm sure there's producers listening to you saying, well, I did the right thing. I am biodynamic. I have the certification, but I don't have a following with sommeliers, and I don't end up on the wine list. So what was the key to your success? Because yes, of course, the quality is there. I've been there. I'm a huge fan of your wines. But you know, there was something that you were able to do clearly also to make sure that people knew about what you were doing. And I think it's more than just a certification also, which is, it's maybe part of the story. So what do you think made your success, and how did you manage to communicate that to sommeliers?
Yeah, okay, this again with the sommelier background, you know, we as a sommelier, you look for different things, right? So if you go to Barolo, you look for for Nebbiolo, what you were saying earlier, Joshua, from a cooler area, because it's more refreshing and it works better with. Sorry, there's somebody trying to phone me WhatsApp. No, so you look for the cooler area because it's fresher and goes better with food. It's obvious. You don't take blockbuster wines into a restaurant. It doesn't work. It kills the food. So if you think from a food perspective in gastronomy, you know, you look for wines with a certain elegance and a certain freshness and nice acidity, and the wines are balanced. So you don't want any of the wines dominated by the oak or by too much alcohol, or you know, everything what is too much doesn't work. You look for a wine which accompanies the food and makes a very pleasant evening to the people coming to eat in your place. Because as a sommelier, you're still a marchand de bonheur. Huh? I love this expression from Serge Dups. He's always saying this. I'm a sommelier, I'm a marchand de bonheur. Fantastic, you know, really. And that's true. You want the people to have a great evening. So to come back to the story, if your story is well, it works. Somebody is a storyteller. As Jérémy is a storyteller in his school, and as our friend Joshua is a storyteller, a journalist is also a storyteller in his magazine. There's somebody disturbing me all the time, I'm sorry. So I think that you should give a clear message. You cannot make the consumer, I say, complicate too much. There's so many wines all over the world. So if you send a message, you have to be clear. So for us, the emblematic grape variety of Barada is Baga. So it's a monovarietal, and we are convinced that the monovarietal is the only true expression of a terroir wine. The moment you start blending, it's like a symphonic orchestra, you know, you have the drummer who has drank the day before, then the trumpet plays a bit higher, and you get more balance. But with a monovarietal, it's a solist. He cannot hide that. The day before was drunk, he's playing, you hear it right away. There's something wrong with the guy. So this was one of the key things in our message we were giving. It's a monovarietal, it's Baga, and it is what it is. But you can make fantastic things if you work well in the vineyard. So this is not only with Baga, it's Nebbiolo, and it's Marvo, Malatiftico. You know, how many single varietals in the world are there who do well? And the interesting thing is with the single varietals, also the Syrah from Jérémy when you're speaking Hermitage, it's a fantastic example. I love the example of Schaaf. It doesn't make any single vineyard. He balances 3 solists or 4 solists to make his cuvée, which is genius. Because every certain place on the hill of Hermitage has a different expression of Syrah. That's the same with Barada. The Baga is in every village different. It's the same with Pinot Noir in Burgundy. It's the same with the building Barolo, Barbaresco. This is the interesting stuff. And I think this is the message which came through. And now we're working on the Bical with the same story, and it works also because it's true. It's a reality. We will our nose onto these examples. And this is what I'm saying to a lot of young growers in Portugal. Please, you know, keep the story simple and work better. And that's it. You know, you start to complicate. You start to speak about 25 different grapes. People don't understand, you know, really. There's so many grapes in Portugal, very interesting. And that's why they blend them. But some of them, they cannot work on their own because they're not fit enough to be on their own, unfortunately. But it's interesting if you say, okay, it's just saying something, it's Rabo de Velia with a little bit of Encruzado and a little bit of whatever, Malvasia and stuff. That's okay. But the major part is Rabo de Velia, and it's got this and this character. And this fits with this and this food. And then you see the price point also is always interesting for people to see that the price point in Portugal is very interesting. Because unfortunately, we cannot charge it, but Burgundy can charge. But we're getting there in 2 centuries, perhaps. Anyway.
I think it's interesting what you're saying. You know, we need cheers. I think it's interesting what you're saying is a story, and someone just commented, you know, the consumers, how do we change their mind and how do we make them care? And I know that HONORE will be talking about that, so I don't want to go over too much. But one of the things that I keep on reading in all research that's been done, you know, from the wine marketing research to psychologists, is that the consumer responds to a story. And so when you're in a restaurant and there's a sommelier selling a bottle of wine, what we do know is that they're willing to try. They just don't, they might order the Merlot for their 50th time because that's what they know. But if you tell them a story, they will follow you. And I think that's what we have to remember and that's the privilege of a sommelier, is that special time around a table telling a story. And I think that's why sommelier have such an important role, because that person leaves the table and go to the liquor store and look for something similar, opens their mind. So thank you so much, William, for sharing this. Time is going on, so I just want to make sure that HONORE has a chance to speak, and we do have time for questions and the panel discussion. HONORE, thank you so much for being with us, and you've done a lot of research and marketing research in terms of what the consumer is looking for and how we can engage them better. So I very much look forward to the presentation. Oh, your microphone is off.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel and to share time with my colleagues from around the world. And such an interesting discussion today. But I'm going to be sharing some slides with everybody and providing a bit of an update and some insights on a project that we're working on here in California, and specifically tied to how we connect with consumers. And what really motivated this from our perspective is we recognized that for all of the work that we are all doing around sustainability and sustainable practices within wine growing and winemaking, and truly investing in our future, it's the wine consumers that carry such an important part of this whole story forward, right? At the end of the day, they really have the power in terms of the wines that they choose. Yet, at the same time, our wine consumers tend to be the most removed and the least informed about what we're doing within our vineyards and in our wineries and the decisions that we're making and how we're investing. So how do we address this? So I wanted to start with the fact that we sort of set a little context in terms of understanding the shift that we're seeing right now all around us in terms of global consumer attitudes, and particularly following on the heels of the Glasgow Climate Conference. There's definitely a sense that global awareness of sustainability and concern about climate crisis is tipping, and that it's about time. However, it is complicated and it's confusing. Nonetheless, we are seeing this concern become a driver of choice for consumers. And so in February 2021, our friends at Wine Intelligence, Lily Halstead in particular, published a follow-up report to their 2019 report on the potential of sustainable, organic, and low alcohol wines. They published this report as part of an intended overall update on the impact of the pandemic on consumer behavior relative to wine. But it was interesting because it showed some evolution on some global trends. So most significantly, as you can see in this slide, across
I'm sorry, Honore, we cannot see the slides for some reason. Thank you very much. No, we can see them.
Okay, great. Yeah, we're still on the first slide. So across the 6 key markets of Australia, Canada, Japan, Sweden, US, and UK, more than half of consumer respondents are making choices about what they do and what they purchase, driven by their concerns about the climate and the environment. 40% are willing to pay more for products that they feel good about. So seeing these trends develop globally is so interesting. Now, when looking at the US specifically, because we have been doing a lot of research within our domestic market, these numbers are even higher, with 71% of US wine drinkers indicating that they would buy sustainably produced wine, and 9 out of 10 millennials are willing to pay more for those sustainable wines. So younger and emerging consumers are increasingly being drawn to sustainable wines and see sustainable certifications as important. And so I was so glad to hear some of the conversation earlier this morning about certification, and we'll talk about that a little bit further. But if we go to the next slide and we shift the conversation to how consumers feel about wine specifically, the emphasis starts to point more towards this idea of environmentally friendly wines. It's opening up the category, with organic and sustainably produced wines really rising to the top of this opportunity index. And the opportunity index is based on consumers' level of awareness, their purchase intent, consideration, and affinity for wines that are produced either sustainably, organic. So the trade also echoes these sentiments. And in a 2019 study conducted by Full Glass Research using the Wine Opinions Trade Panel, 82% of the trade responded that they factor in sustainable practices when selecting wines to sell, and that more than 70% felt that the demand for sustainably produced wine has increased over the past 5 to 10 years. None of this is surprising to us, and we know that that demand is going to continue to increase. The trade also said that more than 70% of them said they would purchase a sustainably produced wine over one that is not, with all things being equal. So all of this is pointing to the fact that the importance of sustainably produced wines and the impact that winemaking has on climate is just going to continue to become even more important to consumers. And so it's these trends, along with the growing pressure that we're hearing directly from customers and consumers around the world, that want to know what we are doing to help address climate. All of these things are fundamental to why we've chosen to make sustainability a pillar of our brand communications. And for the past more than 20 years, California wine growers and winemakers have been investing deeply in sustainable practices. We have one of the largest and most rigorous and most transparent certification programs in the world, the California Sustainable Wine Growing Program. More than 335,000 acres of vineyards, or 136,000 hectares, are currently certified sustainable in California. More than 80% of California's total wine production is produced in a certified sustainable winery. And California is the 4th largest wine producing region in the world after France, Italy, and Spain. And yet most wine consumers have no idea of what we do or really how it affects them. And most importantly, the wine in their glass. And California is not alone in this. So our survival as a global wine community depends on all of us generating interest and action as soon as possible by getting consumers, buyers, importers, sommeliers, retailers, restaurateurs engaged in all of this and truly understanding this cycle and how it works together. We're so fortunate that many consumers are interested, are engaged, are seeking out information. There was that great question in the discussion that Josh raised about how we can help share information with consumers. But there's still a wide number of them that we need to connect with in a more powerful way. So as marketers, it really all comes down to 3 key words: think, feel, do. What do we want the customer, the consumer, to think? What do we want them to know? And how do we want them to feel? And ultimately, what do we want them to do based on how they feel? And within this realm of sustainability, I believe that we have been so focused on sharing information and explaining what we do and why we do it, that we have gotten stalled out on this whole concept of think. We're so focused on making certain that the consumers understand the concepts and the science behind sustainability and how it ties into supporting climate action, that we've sort of stopped there. However, don't get me wrong, the facts and the credibility that goes along with them are incredibly important. In fact, they're vital. But we need to create context for consumers to better understand these facts and how to relate to them. And as you can see in this slide that I'm sharing, that we have done so much on so many fronts, yet we continue to show the same aspects of sustainable wine growing and the elements behind that. But from a consumer's perspective, why are the sheep in the vineyard relevant? Why does it matter how the percentage of our vineyards that are certified? So all of this leads us to a point where we need to rethink how we're presenting this. We need to be bold, dramatic, surprising. We need to move beyond the familiar images and wallpaper of recent years that so few consumers really understand. And all of this will be hard because wine is conservative and conventional. But we have to get real and recognize that the single most finite resource on the planet is not water, it's not oil, it's attention. And we're in a fight for attention every day, where in a world, each of us sees over 5,000 commercial messages in a day. Google tells us on average that we have 1.7 seconds to grab someone's attention and 6 seconds to tell them a story. So when we tell them a story, We all need to make certain that it's a good one. So it's this mindset, this attitude that we need to bring to sustainability. And this is what's driving a project that we are currently in the middle of, which is designed to help capture the hearts and minds of wine drinkers, for us to be candid, bold, direct, and human with them, and make certain that we're connecting with them, because this is what we can do from our perspective as wine marketers. So within this project, next slide, please, our goal is to find a way to create an exciting, motivating, and new language that we can use to speak about sustainability and everything that we're doing here in California to consumers. And I see this language as being verbal and visual, and a whole new way of connecting with them in order to drive engagement for sustainable wines globally, but also to help us tell our story. So to do this, we engaged with a company, Eat Big Fish. They're a global brand consultancy based in the UK. We worked with them to develop our new brand platform for California wines, and we sought their direction and their guidance. Together, we created a process, and we built on their principles behind challenger brands. And we've developed a path to rethink and restructure how we tell the world about California and our deep and lasting commitment to a sustainable wine growing and winemaking future. So the next slide. So we started by asking people on the front lines of California wine and sustainable practices what they thought, what they've been doing, what their connection is. We wanted their insights. We conducted in-depth interviews with each of them, asking for their perspectives that were informed by their remarkable range of experience. And we captured these interviews and are using them as primary material. Going to the next slide, we then gathered our internal team together and spent a day listening, watching, thinking, discussing, debating, and brainstorming. And based on the inputs that we had gathered from that collection of leaders within our industry. We used this model that I'm sharing with you to help guide our work on that day, to make sure that we stayed focused on what we needed to do and what was important. We didn't want to get steered off course in a discussion of issues that we just couldn't fix, that were beyond the scope. We also wanted to stay out of the weeds around execution and instead really focus on what is the core of some of the stories that we can share and that we need to share and connect with consumers. Next slide. And we were very prolific. This is a shot of the outcome from that day, just of one wall, and all of the ideas, the concepts, things that we were discussing. So coming out of that, there were 5 overarching strategic imperatives that emerged from this deep conversation, along with some clear implications of things that we realized that we really needed to say and also do in order to help move beyond just the facts to a connection and context and understanding for consumers. So I'm going to share some of this with you because while it's certainly driving the work that we're currently doing in California, I believe that these are ideas and concepts that we can share and all engage with across the industry. Let's go to the next slide. So these 5 strategic, nope, there we go, thank you. The 5 strategic imperatives that we focused on right here, starting with the fact that the crisis is real and that a conservative industry can do more to lead change. And by this, what we mean is that it's up to us to help excite our wine community and share their remarkable stories of progress and make them compellingly told. This will not only engage with consumers, but will also help draw in more of the leaders, the activists within our industry to engage our wine growers and our winemakers. Second, we need to build a big tent and invite more in. We need to invite consumers in. Please stay on the previous slide. Thank you. We need to invite more consumers in and help them play their part too. Our third, in terms of leveraging our freedom to invent a better way to a new future, this is really about how we find ways to celebrate the successes, the things that we have achieved so far, while at the same time absolutely being humble and clear about all that we have yet to do. This ties back to some of the points we were talking about earlier this morning about needing to focus on or include a sense of optimism, and that there are solutions out there, but how we tap into them is critical. Which leads to our next strategic imperative, which is that wine must always be joyful and celebratory, which we all understand that wine is at its core, it is about enjoyment. And so our goal is to find ways for people to come together and be a part of this solution, and always keep in mind that while wine may not be able to save the world, we can certainly do our part and include those that enjoy it and that are part of our community in part of this search for the solution. And then finally, how are there ways that we can use our marketing platform, we can use our bully pulpit to help address some specific issues in the industry? How can we talk about challenging ideas to a skeptical consumer? How can we help shift the discussion around bottle weight and help convey that lightweight glass is not, or that bottle weight does not correlate to the quality of the wine that's in the bottle, that there are options around packaging, that new varieties are worth exploring, that water preservation is a critical part of what we do. So these are 5 sort of guiding lights behind where we want to go next. And then coming out of this, we also recognize that there were a few key things that we wanted to share and discuss with our consumers that could help guide our conversation going forward. So going to the next slide, one of the first is that as an industry, we have freedom to design better solutions. And from our perspective as Californians, we recognize that we tend to be the world's optimists. It's our golden state of mind. We don't see problems, we see opportunities. If something's broken, we fix it. We love to come up with a new idea, whether it's in Silicon Valley, whether we're working on a social movement, even in Hollywood. We're not bound by convention, that we look forward in order to make progress. And this spirit of innovation and this pioneering spirit is alive and well within our wine industry as a whole, and particularly at a time like now when it's needed most. So we can respond creatively to the challenges of our times. And as I mentioned previously, we know that wine alone can't save the world, but we can absolutely be a part of the solution. And it's critical that we share that with our consumers, with our customers, that we can be forward-looking and forward-thinking. And that while wine is already recognized for being environmentally friendly, how do we take that to the next level and show our current wave of innovation so that our consumers can feel that when they're choosing our wines, that they are also a part of that solution. The next concept is that making certain, as we're speaking with and connecting with consumers, that we're conveying that what we're saving is as important as how. So to many of our customers, existential environmental concepts like extinction, or even to some climate change, can feel abstract and far removed from everyday life. The timeline is so long that they just don't feel real. So how can we change that? One of our goals is that we believe that if we want to bring people along on this journey with us, then we also need to help them understand the destination. We need to romance it a bit. So getting into what specifically is the work that we're doing, what is it in service of? What are the effects of reaching that goal, and how do wine and the greater world shape one another? So what this really is about putting wine into a larger context of the world around it, helping connect consumers to the idea that their choice, when they are looking at their wall of wine, the retail shelves in front of them, when they're looking at a wine list, that their choice matters. So bringing it back to what they do, and that really makes an impact. And then the third aspect of this is creating this expanded sense of community and possibility. Because we all recognize that our wine community, particularly on a global scale, is as varied as our lands, as our vineyards. We support the livelihoods of sommeliers and importers, retailers and restaurateurs around the world. Vineyards are worked by people from new countries and also fifth-generation families that have lived there. This diversity is a unique asset and a key part of our shared sustainable future. So how do we create an expanded sense of community and the possibilities that come along with that? By showcasing all of the ways that multiple generations are involved in this cause, and will ultimately be affected by it. It shows the long-term thinking and the vision behind what we're doing and helps make it relevant. By highlighting the many different faces of our industry, the impact that they have and the impact that what we're doing has on them and on their families makes it real. We bring it back down to that small human scale. And by including not just famous families, but our importers, those working in the vineyards, the scientists in the lab and the enologists, the more that we can show that thinking sustainably and thinking generationally go hand in hand, I believe creates a portal for consumers to relate on their own human scale. So we all recognize that this current stage and the next stage of our journey won't be an easy one. It is not one that we will be taking on alone. It will take a multi-hued coalition of the willing to participate, to make these choices. It will take everyone, and it is a generational thing. And the important thing is that where we're headed is that we want to make certain that our wine consumer understands that that includes them, and includes them starting today. So this is where we're at. As you can see, this is a program and a project that is in progress. We are now currently in the stage of transitioning into the campaign development, and we are looking forward to rolling out our new campaigns and communications later in 2022. But we also recognize this is an ongoing process. It's not just a one and done. Most importantly, it's shifting the way that we are thinking about how we present the information behind our sustainable wine growing and winemaking practices, finding ways to connect with consumers in a meaningful way to help engage them and help bring them along to be a part of the solutions that we are working hard to put in place. So, thank you.
Thanks, Honor. Thank you very much for all of those great insights. I know it's 3:30, we should be done, but there's some questions that have been coming through, and I do want to make sure that I bring all the panelists on the screen and to go over some of those questions. It is the last seminar of the entire series, so I reserve the right to be 10 minutes late. We were on time for every single seminar. And if you have to go, you can watch the replay, but I do want to have a discussion with everyone. I think it's important. So I really, we've been talking a lot about language, how to communicate, and we're kind of exploring a lot of the solutions, but it's still difficult to get the consumer's attention. And Josh early on, recommended that we talk about something, and I do want to go over that because I think it's important. So Josh earlier said, I'm just trying to re-find it here. I have a lot of messages. Okay, so Josh was saying, why have we not developed a more accurate term for conventional agriculture? Some people say chemical farming. Is there a more precise word, as we have more precise words for organic, biodynamic, and regenerative agriculture? This should no longer be considered conventional. Josh, you have the floor.
Yeah, listening to Jeremy, when he said conventional, it just occurred to me, wow, we're still calling this conventional, that it's conventional to plow all these pesticides and herbicides into our land. Why is that conventional? And why should we be honoring it with that term? There must be a better way of describing what these people are doing when they're farming, the way we describe what people are doing when they're farming organically or biodynamically. And I don't think anyone's come up with it yet. We could call it chemical farming, but it's not always chemical farming. So, and there's chemical farming in organics, people use sulfur.
Also, if I can jump in, the problem is we have one word for so many things. There's so many ways to farm, and there's very responsible people and others working with lots of chemicals, and then we use the same word. So that's also part of the problem. But it's also because there's no rules, and there's clear rules for organic and biodynamic wines. But when it comes to being sustainable, even though you're not organic or biodynamic, then you enter a big category which is conventional, and that's a problem. So I mean, we have a couple of bodies. We have HVE in France, etc. So there are a couple of other labeling terms, but yeah, it's still a big category. So we should all think about finding ways to define and to have a better language when it comes to speaking about people who are not organic or biodynamic, or at least not accredited.
It's also interesting going along with the language, because I find that in the wine industry, when you talk to sommelier and importers, the word sustainable has been kind of, we're being a bit, we think it's greenwashing. It's a word that we're using freely, and everyone says, I'm sustainable. Where in the research, in a lot of the market research, it's quite the opposite with the consumers. Even though they might seek out biodynamic, organic, they're more familiar with organic because they buy food like this. But when you ask them, the word they resonate the most with is sustainable, because they feel like it's a bigger part of the solution. So my question to you is, we've been talking a lot about different solutions, but at the end of the story, you know, it's different if you're in a restaurant, but if you are a customer going to a wine store, your kids are waiting for you in the car, and you have to make a quick decision on what you're going to drink tonight. You want to do the right thing, but you don't have 10 minutes to weigh the pros and cons and maybe stop someone to help you choose that bottle of wine. How can we help move along this? Because the consumer want to do the right thing. It's like me, when I buy my coffee, I want it to be fair trade. They want to do the right thing. So how can we grab their attention and make sure they're buying the right bottle of wine?
I think it would certainly help if we had a global definition of sustainable, because everybody's definition of sustainability is completely different in all different regions. And I think that as a journalist, I find it very difficult to use that term effectively.
Yes.
And so the first thing I would say is that if we're going to use the term sustainable, and I think it's a legitimate term if it were defined, it should have a global definition.
I have to weigh in on that, Josh, and we do have a global definition of sustainability. And I believe that we need to partner with our colleagues in the media and around the world to convey it simply and clearly, so the consumers do understand that it is the holistic system that, of course, includes not only the way we grow the fruit, the way we make the wine, but also the way that we serve the community, as well as the way that we run the business. And it's the whole integrated system combined. I mean, ironically, there are different definitions of organic all around the world. So it's a challenge that is, I believe, stemmed from the fact that these programs have been developing, popping up, starting more than 20 years ago, popping up around the world with shared goal, but through different means. So now we need to collaborate, become consistent, clear, and simple. And I also think that one of the critical tools that we have is certification. And so because certification programs that, for example, within California, we have the California Sustainable Winegrowing.com, which is a website that any consumer, journalist, winemaker, sommelier, restaurateur around the world can go to learn about all of the detail behind the California Sustainable Wine Growing Program. It's all there. It is clear and effective and efficient. So I think that sometimes we hold on to the myth that we don't have a single definition, and it's time for us to move beyond that as an industry and to use the tools that we have.
Well, all I say on is that I study this stuff constantly, and I could not define for you what sustainable is in different parts of the world. And I've seen different parts of the world state their sustainability differently. So I challenge all of us to come up with simple terms like, I can define for you what biodynamics is. I can define for you what organics is, even where it's different in different places. But sustainability, I cannot define that for you. It's too vague a concept for me to define.
And I think if I may add, to this, Josh, I think also the concept evolves constantly, right? With the era, like, you know, not so long ago, we were not tracking the carbon footprint within a lot of the certification that deems to be sustainable. Now we're starting to include it in the sustainable certification. So I think sustainability is something that's been evolving, where in some ways organic and biodynamic has been those principles will follow, and they've been more static.
Actually, organic wines and have evolved as well. It started in the vineyard and it's in the winery as well nowadays, and I believe it will evolve again. But I was thinking back your question, Michel. There's a very simple answer. If we had to give an advice to people who are in front of the shelves and want to pick a bottle and they don't know at all what they need to pick, if you want to make a change, pick the light bottle. Don't pick the heavy one. I mean, that's pretty simple. That's basic, yes. But it's important.
It's
important.
It's so true. And I always say, I don't care if you're sustainable, certified, organic or biodynamic. If your bottle is 1 kilo for my Monday drinking, I don't want that bottle, right? And it's something that we need to be a bit more vocal about this, all of us. We have so many more questions coming in. I could go on for another hour because each of you have so much things to share, but I'm conscious of the time and we went 10 minutes over. Just to wrap up, there's something. I was attending a conference with Wine Intelligence, and and I know that some of you are listening and I've listened to this before, but she was sharing 5 things that we should remember when we try to communicate to consumer, but I will also add to students, to schools, to grab their attention. And one of the things is, you know, today, not tomorrow. People want to feel like they're making a change now. If it's too far removed from now, they won't make that change. So to Jérémy's point, choosing a lightweight bottle is something that we can see the impact now, right? So that point is extremely important. Keeping on sharing positive messaging. If it's negative, people just won't respond to it. People also like to be part of a group effort. So as a winery, as association, as a school, how can we make sure that people are feeling like they're part of this movement? By doing something, they're part of something bigger. William was mentioning the story. That's something that people resonate with, emotional stories. So we need to keep on telling a story, knowing that they've saved 80 grams of CO2 might be important for us, but for consumer, they won't resonate to that. So we need to share a story. And lastly, we don't have a lot of time to grab their attention. So we need to be to the point, right? We have a lot more questions coming in and comments, so I'm sorry we won't go over all of those, but this is the last conference of the 2021 Tasting Climate Change edition. I want to thank you all for registering. It's a big thing to tackle, but I do believe, as Jérémy mentioned, when we wrote this book, I think what comes clear to us is that there are a lot of solutions. The only way forward is by sharing those solutions so that we can all move forward together. The wine industry can become a leader. We all have a responsibility. And I do believe that together we can be the change. If we've missed some of those seminars, they are all online for you until December 30th. So enjoy over Christmas and don't forget to share some of those solutions with your friends. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jérémy, William, Josh, and Honore. It was a pleasure to have you to conclude this seminar and this edition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michel, and congratulations for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.